Welcome to the Walnut Creek Library live programming. My name is Mark Brown, and I have the honor of being a member of both the Walnut Creek Library Foundation, which is putting on tonight's event, and being a board member of the Walnut Creek Historical Society. Our guest speaker tonight is the docent manager for the Walnut Creek Historical Society. His name is Ted Dobbs, and more about him in a minute. I first want to give credit to our sponsors, Minuteman Press from Lafayette, the East Bay Times, and the Friends of the Walnut Creek Library. We're very grateful that they've all supported this programming for so long. Very grateful. I also want to bring your attention to a brochure that you were all handed or being handed out right now. This indicates our 24-25 season for the Walnut Creek Library Foundation. Our next program is going to be a retrospective of all the mayors in Walnut Creek who will be leading a forum, and that is going to be on September 10th. So mark your calendars for September 10th, and you have a list of all the upcoming events for the 24-25 season. I'd also be remiss if I didn't ask you to consider making a donation to the Walnut Creek Library Foundation. It's through your contributions that we're able to continue this great programming. I'd also like to make a plug for the Walnut Creek Historical Society. They also offer memberships, and as you probably know or not know, we are the stewards of the Shadelands Museum on Ignacio Valley Road, which is a mansion that's been there since 1903. Thank you. I keep forgetting the year. Ted Dobbs, our guest speaker tonight. Well, before I say that, I will tell you that at 7:45 and 7:55, you'll hear an announcement. Don't be distracted by that. It's just an indication that the library is about to close. Now, on to Ted. Ted has been our docent manager since 2021, roughly 20. Yeah, he can't even remember himself because he's been doing it so regularly for so long. He doesn't know when he became manager. And he's been on our board since 2019. And we're just delighted to have him here tonight. During his real job career, he was an underwriter for a large insurance company. Homer and Dean?
Deans and Homer.
Deans and Homer. Got it backwards. That's the dyslexia kicking in. He also has an interesting little factoid, which I'm going to spill right now. His insurance company, he underwrote the lighthouse that's on top of Mount Diablo, and also underwrote it as it was being rehabilitated and repaired. Have that correct? Okay.
Yep.
And then they brought it back up the hill, all without breaking, so they didn't have to pay out a claim.
That's a good thing.
So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Ted Dobbs, who will be talking to you about open space. Oh, one last thing. Peter Magnani, our program director for this wonderful program we have, asked me, Mark, what was it before the 50 years of open space? Wasn't it still open space before then? And I'll let Ted fill you in on why that's the case, why 50 years ago was such a significant period of time. Well, without ado, Ted Dobbs.
So can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So before I get into the talk, our exhibit at the Shadelands is closing in like a week or 2 weeks. So if you get a chance, come Wednesday, tomorrow, or Sunday between 1 and 4 and see the full open house exhibit. So imagine, if you will, this could have been Walnut Creek. This could have been Walnut Creek. Can you imagine? All these crowded hills. I mean, it's amazing. Instead, what we have is this. Do you guys all know or have a feeling for how we got to this versus, well, that's what tonight's talk is about. And even for me, when I moved to Walnut Creek in 79, I knew that we had purchased the hillsides. And so I had an inkling about the impact that the citizens, the residents of Walnut Creek did to capture this. But since then, I've done more research in order to prepare for all of this. So we're going to start with the video of Audrey Bramhall. Then we're going to go to talk about some timelines and some vote details that occurred in 1974. And then some interesting things about different parts of the open space. And I'd like everybody to focus on this, though, because the open space, we've got to stay vigilant to keep it as nice as those green hills are.
Walnut Creek was very much in a transition. We were either going to be a town with our own identity, or we were going to be seeing any number of developments. In the early 1970s, we were seeing a great deal of growth. Many people coming to the suburban communities. There was a 200-acre parcel of land at the end of Walnut Boulevard that was proposed for development. And there were no sewers, electricity, anything up there. And so it was all going to be brought in. And as that property were to be developed, it was going to open up many hundreds of acres all the way up Mount Diablo. So it was a whole new craziness that the citizens of Walnut Creek were very concerned about. And Bob Schroeder, who was the mayor of Walnut Creek at the time, said we either needed to put our money where our mouths were and do something about stopping this type of development or let it go. So that's where it started. We started by sending out letters to all sorts of groups. It was definitely a grassroots effort, and we were very conscious that we wanted to make it a community-wide effort, not a special interest group. And that was very important to us, that this be something that all citizens could grasp. We had enough money collected that we were able to hire a consulting firm. We put together figures of $6.75 million as being the amount of money that we could afford to buy this property. So that was what was put on the June 4th, 1974 election. We were thinking of open space, parks, and trails, so that we wanted every part of the city to have something, because we were taxing ourselves for, in 1974, an additional $35 a year on our property taxes. And at that time, people were more conscious that $35 was a lot. There was a group of about a half a dozen of us that went around and talked to anybody that would listen to us. We also, at this time, there was a big transition in the city council. And we had great support from the city. So we really had support from many different groups. It was an absolutely amazing experience. The weekend before the Tuesday election, we used the rest of our campaign money and rented a cable car. And we had dignitaries and city council and children, many of our own children, on this cable car all over the city. And we had flowers, and we were giving out flowers, just reminding people. Then after the election, I can remember being interviewed by the newspaper and, awestruck that this was, to the best of our knowledge, the largest bond passed by citizens to preserve open space parks. To me, one of the awesome things is that you can park your car, say, at Indian Valley School or Sutherland and walk 500 feet and feel as though you're not seeing another house or hearing anything except nature. And to me, that's the awesome thing, that it's right at our back door. I feel very proud of what we have succeeded in doing, in preserving this land. But we must be watchdogs for forever to preserve this identity and to keep it the way we are. And I think it is a proud accomplishment, and I think the people of Walnut Creek should be very proud of what we've done.
That's really a nice summary and/or introduction. And you can see on this map, the big green blobs are the 4 big pieces of land, about 1,800 acres, Acalanes Ridge, Lime Ridge, Shell Ridge, and Sugarloaf. Sugarloaf is down here, Acalanes is over there, Shell Ridge, and Lime Ridge. And all of these open spaces are interconnected by trails. And this open space is probably the largest open space in the entire Bay Area. So now let's talk a little bit about each of these 4 big pieces, parcels. Shell Ridge is about 1,475 in total acreage. Lime Ridge is 1,226 acreage. 25% of it is owned by Concord, but we manage it. So we control and manage the Concord piece of the Lime Ridge space. Acalanes Ridge is relatively small, 195 acres, and parts of this are owned by the Muir Heritage Land Trust. And then Sugarloaf is about 176 acres, and it's right along the Highway 680 as you go south. So let's talk about some other areas that are kind of part of this whole open space idea. Borges Ranch was established in 1899 as a 700-acre cattle ranch, and it's really interconnected or part of Shell Ridge. The Howe Homestead is a historic house owned by James P. Howe, who was an AP foreign correspondent and a bit of a Renaissance man. I mean, he did bees and winemaking and all sorts of odds and end things. And if you go there, you get a sense of the recreation of an urban farm. And it's connected to Shell Ridge also. Okay, so now that you've seen a little bit about the 3,000 acres, how did we get there? So, as Audrey said, in November 1970, residents started to balk at the very pro-growth, pro-business relating to a 600-house development on the 200 acres along Shell Ridge. And there was talk about scalping of hills and all sorts of scary stuff. And it was really a kind of a grassroots rebellion on the parts of the residents. Then in April '71, the Walnut Creek City Council creates an open space committee made up of 14 people, residents, builders, and other organizations. December of '72, City develops a comprehensive open space plan and an action plan. '73, an open space consultant presented something to the city, and it was adopted as a resolution 3059 as part of Walnut Creek's general plan. June 6, '74, measures G&F passes, and the bond measure for $6.75 million is authorized for the purchase of the 1,812 acres for the 3 open spaces. Proposition or Measure G was a property tax levy for administration and maintenance of the open space, and F was the bond measure issued to acquire the lands. Now, when I was doing this research, I came across a series of articles in the Contra Costa Times in early June of 1974. So I'm reading the papers of 1974, and that's what some of this is all about. So let me go day by day, if you will. June 2nd, on page 4, there's an ad for voting for the ballot of F and G. June 4th, on page 1, 286,000 votes are cast. No results yet. June 5th, on page 1, we're still counting, but we don't know anything yet. June 6th, page 1, we're reprogramming the machines, the computers, resulting in a 10-hour delay. And on page 2, 21% of the vote is so far counted. And F required a simple majority, and G required a 2/3 majority. June 7th, page 1, there's an article about Lafayette and Pleasant Hill, who both rejected open space measures that year. Bond measure F passes with 74% of the vote, and G passes with 68% of the vote. Yes, very close. Page 3 of June 7th, Contra Costa County was the last county in the state of California to report their ballot results to Sacramento. So, activities after the bond measure of June 6th. June 24th of 74, the Contra Costa County Service Area Number 8 was created to tax the appropriate residents of Walnut Creek. June 25th, an agreement was reached between Contra Costa County and the city to purchase and manage open space land. 74 and 75, consultants, lawyers, surveyors, appraisers started acquiring lands. December of 77, the Greenbelt Action Committee is created. March 88, Walnut Creek City Council redirects $2 million from the general funds for more land acquisition. And from 89 to 93, Walnut Creek spent probably somewhere in the order of $10 million to acquire open space land. An open space manager, city park manager, was hired to manage the open space. 1979, the Open Space Foundation incorporated as a nonprofit to educate and protect the open spaces for the benefit of Walnut Creek residents. Recently, the Open Space Foundation and the city have cooperated to buy East Bay mud parcels, and we have bought all of them that they have offered us. So a little more detail, one more. One forward. Yeah, yeah. So open space oaks, oak habitat restoration. This has been was started back in 1991 by Dick Daniel and Ralph Craich, maybe. Craich, well, that was close. And Leslie was good enough at one of our earlier talks about this to share that we discovered all sorts of things when we first started this. You know, when you plant something, you got to put a fence around it, keep the cattle from trampling it. Acorns needed to be planted with protection, and you have to water them for 2 years. Open space needed habitat restoration to encourage wildlife back, which would create valuable ecosystems. So this has been going on, this oak restoration for some time now. Here's some additional pictures of the 30th anniversary of these oaks. Here's an example of the little fencing to protect them from critters. And this was at this 30th anniversary, it also was the commemorating, if you will, paying off the bond measure. And they've started, I think they've started the 30-30. I probably get this a little bit wrong, but the idea is 30 years and we're planting 30 oak trees. Did I get that more or less right?
I never knew they planted as many as 30, but it was certainly 30 years. And they did plant some, and there were a number on that hillside, and there were 30 altogether.
Yeah. Okay, some more interesting things about the open space. And I've got 4 or 5 slides, and I'll just kind of run through them real quick. There's fossils, of course, on Shell Ridge. There's Indian grinding spots. There's railroad tracks. There's a labyrinth, a couple of labyrinths. There's beautiful flowers, of course. There's quarries up there. There's the railroad track. Remnants of cattle operations, of course. Ponds, flowers. It's important to protect all of these places, so we don't like to share where the railroad tracks are and the quarries and so on and so forth. So if you stumble across it, great. Don't pick at it. Don't take it home with you. Okay, so why do we care about all this open space? Some of this, of course, is a desire to protect all of these flora and fauna, create wildlife corridors, reduce environmental deterioration, maintain hillsides and natural beauty so that we can look out and look at these hills. Trails, hiking, and dog walking opportunities, of course. Create a land bank for future parks for Walnut Creek. Maintain natural undeveloped areas for residents to enjoy. Reduce traffic congestion. Imagine if all these hillsides were covered with houses, the traffic would be crazy. And part of this open space also halted a little bit of the expansion going down this southeast corridor along 680. And of course, the important thing about this open space also is it teaches our kids about nature. We got to get them away from their little mobile phones. Okay, what's this screen about? Oh, right. Okay, so this is, I didn't really have any notes about this, but this is kind of things that are coming up that you could participate in. And I think Leslie can get you signed up for some of these things if you want to do this. Okay, so now I'm going to share a little bit about the Walnut Creek Historical Society. Probably most of you have been, and if you haven't, you should come. But our mission is to preserve, promote, and interpret the history of Walnut Creek and our local history. And it's fascinating, the things that I've learned. For example, I'll give you a short little tidbit of one of our history and wine talks. I discovered that back in the let's say late 1800s, early 1900s, you'd think that the focus would have been down here in downtown Walnut Creek. But Oak Grove was a direct shot to Pacheco and a deep water port. And there was major traffic up and down delivering wheat and corn and whatever was grown in that upper Ignatia Valley area. And that was fascinating for me to discover that that was such an important route. So here's something about the Penniman family. Hiram, the gentleman on the far left, is the guy who built the house. And this is his second wife, Carrie, and some of the kids. Hiram had a total of 5. One died as an infant. But what is so fascinating with all of these kids, none of them had any kids of their own. None. And what makes that so nice for the Historical Society is that almost everything in the house is a Penniman artifact. That's super important. I remember giving a tour maybe a month or two ago to somebody who had just gone to the John Muir House, and they said they have one true John Muir artifact. And we have, I don't even know how many. It's beyond our count. It's probably in the hundreds. Can't turn the pages here. So, here's my pitch for all of you who like people and like history. Become a docent. It's very enjoyable. I've now done it since, what did I say? 8 years, I think. I've now done it for 8 years. And then Priscilla asked me to kind of lead the docent management piece of the house. So I've been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. But there's lots of opportunities for being a docent. Lots of volunteering opportunities. Here's another thing that we just started this year. I talked a little bit earlier. That's our next one, October 17th. We haven't quite decided on the topic yet. We got to get a little more organized about this. I like whosever idea was that you were talking about, the little bookmark, if you will, with all the calendar events so we can hand it out and give it to people. So as a reminder, here's some other activities that are actually happening this August 11th, so that's this weekend. The teas. And as a reminder, come either Monday or Sunday for your last chance to see the open space exhibit, which includes things like this and the listing of all the properties that were purchased. Here's a picture of the house. You've probably all driven by it 1,000 times. One of my first questions that I always like to ask when somebody comes to the house is, how many times have you driven by the house before you actually stopped in? And it's fascinating to hear the answers, In fact, by show of hands, how many have been to the house? Oh my God, I'm preaching to the choir here. Very good. I'm delighted. Let's see. Mark already mentioned, built in 1903. It was a fruit and nut farm. I guess Walnut Creek received the house in 1970, but that's the kind of thing that we talk about when you take a tour. And that's it. And hopefully you don't have too many difficult questions. I will try to tackle some of the questions.
Thank you so much, Ted. If you do have questions, I would ask that you raise your hand and I'll come to you with the microphone so everybody can hear your questions. So, have at it. Jerry.
Not really a question, just addition to what we have, both with two ladies here, my wife Kathy Hicks and Leslie Hunt. were on the Parks and Recreation at the time in 1989, 35 years ago. And it then became the Parks, Recreation, and Space at that time. In 1970, I found out, looking at circulation in Walnut Creek, originally coming from Pittsburgh through the area of Concord, going through the space area, joining in 680 down at Danville. And that was on from the 1960s on the state planning for roads. And I think possibly you're in on that too, but Gail Murray, very important, turning down, with a lot of people, turning down this approval of the freeway coming down in that
That was
way.
the freeway.
Thank God we saved the Parks and Recreation.
Was that the freeway that was going to go through the open space?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Thanks, Jerry. That's really interesting. Anyone else have questions? Lisa? Oh, I'll repeat it. Go ahead.
So I just want to know more about that. That was a question I was going to have that I'd always had to. I've lived here since 95, and I've worked here since 93. So I've lived here a fair amount of time. But I'd always, and I live on this side of town, but I worked out at Shadelands, and I've always had heard there was this freeway that was going to go. So was the plan that there was going to be a where was it going to go specifically?
Well, my understanding, and I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding, it was going to connect maybe around Sugarloaf or south of Sugarloaf, and it was going to cut through. Wow, too bad we can't get the big map of Walnut Creek. It would have cut through from Sugarloaf through Shell Ridge, and then I'm not sure how it would connect into the where would it have gone after that? Kirker Pass Road.
What happened was that people wanted a better way to get from East County down south because they were developing San Ramon at the time, and there were a lot of jobs down there. So they proposed that it come from somewhere, I believe, in the general vicinity of Kirker Pass, and down and across Shell Ridge, and across the ridges below that, and dropped into Alamo or Danville somewhere. There were 5 people on the city council, including Merle Hall, who thought this was a great idea. A lot of other people didn't think so. And eventually, the Open Space Foundation took a position against it. We lobbied against it. And I recently learned that Mount Diablo State Park had money, and they arranged with East Bay Regional Parks to buy the land. So the crucial piece of land between Shell Ridge and public property on the other side, which I think is Mount Diablo State Park, but that blocked the way, and the freeway was finished. The vote at the council, 4-1. You know who the one was.
Any other questions? This gentleman was first.
So you had the interesting photographs of the circle stones, and that's not shown on any map of the area, and it's not generally broadcast where those locales are. Is that what I understand you said?
Can somebody speak to that? Because I don't know where they are.
Just like you said, it is not generally discussed.
Not generally discussed is the answer. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, it was not done, those weren't created legally in the sense that the open space was promoting buildings of lavender. People do that on their own, and the cities kind of, you know, they don't want to make a big deal about having people, because a lot of them are not on the actual trails, so you have to go off trail to get to them, so.
Yeah.
I enjoy the open space, all of these open spaces a lot, but there's one thing that bothers me, and I see these unauthorized bike trails, and I wonder, is there anything you can do about that? It's kind of disappointing.
So it's funny you bring this up because this was a hotly contested issue earlier in the summer with the proposal to build a flow trail that ended at Boundary Oaks Golf Course, an authorized trail. But to your point, some of the neighbors in the Rancho Paraiso area where I happen to live, I was not one of them, but they were very upset, you know, not in my backyard. And so the city of Walnut Creek decided to not go forward with an authorized trail. It's my view that that would be a good idea. And instead, to your point, people are doing just carving up the hillside by riding their bikes down either trails meant for just hikers, or they're creating their own trails. And it especially Shell Ridge, but also Lime Ridge. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for your observation.
Anybody else?
I think I'm a latecomer. I moved here in 2000, but this is marvelous that the citizens did this. But I'm wondering if the bond measure passed in '74 and property acquisition was still going on in the '80s and '83 and so forth.
It went on.
How was market values created? Because I can see, you know, capitalism at work here. Was eminent domain ever required to get various properties?
There was eminent domain? There's some articles about eminent domain. I didn't, when I was reading the papers, I didn't see any references to eminent domain. But I kind of agree with you. If it stretched on for 10 or 15 years, on the other hand, like in the case of the East Bay Mud, they probably acquired a bunch of these parcels figuring, okay, we're going to have houses on all these hills. We got to have tanks and pumping stations and blah, 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 blah. And when the city bought, or when the residents bought all the hills, then they realized, okay, now I don't need this land anymore. So maybe, and that probably depressed the price of land. So good, it's a good economics question. Anybody else?
Let's give a hand to Ted Dobbs. Before we all go, I'd like to give a shout out to our ex-mayor who's here tonight and introduce a couple of folks. Kathy Hicks, would you stand up? Because you were so instrumental in developing Walnut Creek, and we can't thank you enough. And I also want to give a shout out to one of the founders and longtime supporters, if not the supporter, of the Walnut Creek Open Space Foundation, Leslie Hunt. And after tonight...
I wasn't here in time.
Oh, well, you were close. Yeah, but anyhow, after tonight's presentation, feel free to stop by and talk to Leslie. She has a wealth of knowledge about what is going on in all of the open space. So again, thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you here in September. Thank you so much.
And pick up a brochure,
Pick up our brochure, yeah.
and miscellaneous things out on the outside table.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
you.